School Committee meeting of May 9th, 2023. It is 6:18 p.m. We're sorry for the little bit of a late start this evening. We are moving our public comment traditionally at the top of the meeting to the bottom of the meeting today because after this introduction, we will have a consideration of reorganization of the school committee. And so we will have public comment at the end today. But before we do that, we would like to recognize our departing student reps today, Elle O'Connor and Charlie Savage. We would like to express gratitude for their contribution to this committee, for bringing student voice really back prominently to the school committee in the 2 years that you've been with us. And we really appreciate you growing and changing with us. I know it started under Miss Bolognese, had started to engage you in new ways other than just coming to the school committee to report on the happenings of the high school. And I think I speak for all of the committee members here tonight when I thank you for doing that. I know that your peers are also now more engaged in what's happening in the school committee and more interested in being a part of this process because of what you have done here. Senator Lewis has put together a citation for you for your work from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and we were waiting for someone from his office to bring those forward to you tonight, but must have gotten caught in some traffic. So we will get those to you, and we also have some cards to present to you, and some flowers just to say thank you. Appropriately read.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
And I know that you will be back with us next week to introduce the new members that are elected from among yourselves. So I won't have you take them tonight, but next week you're welcome to slip your name tags out and take those with you as well for posterity too.
Thank you so much.
Would any of the other committee members like to, we'll go around the table, I guess. Mr. Hopcroft?
Well, yeah, so thank you so much. I mean, you've been here the whole time I've been here, and so it's been great getting to know you, and particularly the day on the Hill, Beacon Hill, was really wonderful. You guys led the conversations in many of the meetings with lawmakers, and made us very proud. I was particularly, when, I'm not going to remember which, I think we were in Senator Jalen's office, and the folks from Stoneham or Medford were there, and you were talking about the project-based assessments and how you learned in those. And I was like, whoa, students learning, doing assessments? But it was just, you certainly made the district look very, very good. So, thank you very much, and we wish you, the absolute best, for your journey ahead. And obviously, reach back to any of us if you ever need a connection or anything.
I want to echo what Michelle said. I appreciate that Karen and Michelle have both involved you more and more. That's been really exciting to see as a member of the committee. My mother reminded me that way back when, I guess I did something similar to what you did when I was in high school. So I put it in your cards, but I'm going to put it publicly on the record now. When you run for election, when you do, wherever you do, you'll either have my vote if I'm eligible, or I'll at least be donating to your campaign. So I look forward to both of you getting elected in the future. And congratulations. Thank you for all your work.
Just thank you so much for everything over the 2 years that you've been with us. You've always been so prepared and just so engaging with us, with the students from the high school. So it's just been, I really appreciated everything that you've had to say and all of your insights. And it's been exciting just to see how you've grown and how you've grown the role. So just thank you so much, and best wishes.
So your voice has been really important to me in our conversations, and in some respects you kind of help us stay a little bit grounded. I think coming out of COVID, I mean, we were all, but in particular I was very interested in what those lessons learned were, and so we've had some good conversations about like what changes have we made because of COVID we want to keep, what things would we not want to keep. And from time to time you just give a really helpful perspective from the student experience. I'm really also impressed you guys have kind of stuck it out till the very end at a number of our meetings where we talked about some things that, certainly don't sound very entertaining, but they can really have an impact in the lives of students and particularly high schoolers. And there are many anecdotes. I mean, the most recent one that I will stick with me for a while is, we were having that lengthy conversation about the budget and whether we were going to add 0.2% to the budget to bring some Mandarin to the high school. And we were talking about who's interested, who's not, whether or not we'd done a survey last year. And Charlie said, can I just be honest with you? Kids just like talk to their friends in the hallway. And sometimes we can overthink it. You kind of keep us grounded in that respect. So I really appreciate that a lot. And we'll miss you guys.
So, and this is my last act as chair, and I can't think of a better one. So, thanks for being with us. Would you like to introduce the students you brought with you today before we move on? Because I think you do have a lot of interest.
Yes, so these are 3 of our potential school committee representatives. I'm Georgia Keeler. Nice to meet all of you. I don't already know you, but thanks for inviting us today.
Hi, I'm Michaela Jens. I was here one time before, but it's so good to be back.
Yeah, I'm Meher. I'm a sophomore. Also super excited to be back. I was here maybe about a month ago, so thank you for having us back.
And to echo Mr. Brady, in terms of elections, I know that may be on top of your minds lately too, and whether you get elected this time or not, you should always try again. And even if you're not elected, we still welcome student voice at the committee. So please don't think that this is your only opportunity to give your voice if you are not chosen to be rep. We're always happy to hear from the students. So.
And if you really want to impress us, we do meet over the summer. So if you have nothing, come say hi.
So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Did you want to say
I'm
anything, Dr. Hackett?
I feel like I'm gonna cry. I'm gonna really miss you guys. This has been great. I love the energy and the voice that you bring, and enthusiasm. And to Mr. Nixon's point, you just give us that perspective, and you've been a big part of. You've been on this since I've been here as well. So I'm sure you'll be. There'll be people who will be able to come in and fill right in the role, but I will miss it. Good luck. And I'm sure I'll see you before at the end of the year. So.
Yeah.
Charlie, you're local. You can still drive back and attend the meetings.
We can do a post-grad program.
Here for the summer meetings.
Hell, you can send public comment.
I'll take a flight back.
Oh, all right.
Watch on WinCam.
Yeah.
So Dr. Hackett, with that, I turn the meeting over to
Well,
you.
thank you, Madam Chair. And with that, we will be reorganizing the school committee. As you remember, we did postpone the reorganization until after town meeting, which we did, I believe, last year as well. And tonight we will be considering reorganization, starting with the nominations for chair. So at this point, I would open the floor for nominations for chair.
I'd like to nominate Tom Hopcroft for chair.
I'd like to second that nomination.
I would accept that.
Okay, you just went through my steps, so are there any other nominations for chair? Hearing none, I would close nominations. And with that, all those in favor of Mr. Hopcroft as chair of the school committee,
Aye.
Aye.
I turn the meeting over to you, Mr. Chair.
Well, thank you.
All right.
Well, first of all, thank you, committee. I'm very honored by being voted into this position, and it's a big responsibility that I take very seriously. And I look forward to continuing the work and following in the footsteps of those who have been in this role before me and learning. There's certainly a lot. I've learned a lot in 2 years, and I feel like I'm only at the base of the mountain to learn here, but thank you for that. So the first action that I need to do is open nominations for vice chair for the committee.
I'd like to nominate Michelle Bergstrom as vice chair.
Is there a second?
I'd second that.
Ms. Bergstrom, do you accept that?
Yes.
Okay. Are there any other nominations?
I'd like to nominate Seamus Brady for vice chair.
Seamus? Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Do you accept that?
I do.
Okay. Any others? We can have discussion on on our two candidates. Michelle Bergstrom, and I guess we could do it one after the other, or we could do them together. But do people want to?
Well, let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
Rather than a discussion of candidates, since you're the chair, congratulations, first time in the role. Do you have some thoughts about sort of what you're looking for in terms of support from a vice chair? Anything in particular? Since you're new to the role?
I am new to the role, and I'm relatively new to the committee. I've only been here a couple of years, and I see I think having new voices are important for for any institution. I also think, as I mentioned, I'm at the base of a very large mountain, and there's far more that I don't know than that I do know. And so I think also having, someone who has the experience and the connections and whatnot is also very important. It's a little bit awkward for me to be answering this question because I see both. I feel like, in my view, I bring the new voice, and I would be complimented by having someone who understands the institution and the role better.
And so I asked the question the way I did to actually make it less awkward, because I feel like we're better off, rather than discuss sort of the personalities and the people, but just to talk about sort of what is it you're looking for being a new chair. And I'm reflecting on what it was sort of like for me. I was actually not elected to a chair or vice chair in my first term. It was my second term. Kind of thought I knew what was going on until I got into the seat, and then I got fastballs pitched at my head every day. So I would just like to say, regardless of how the vote goes down, I support you entirely. I'm sure you have the support of the full committee, given all the nature of things that the chair has to deal with. You can call on me at any time if you want my advice on something. You probably will if it has to do with capital planning stuff and EFPBC stuff. But really, but anything. And I appreciate your remarks, because I think having somebody in the role who has some experience. I wondered if this was something I was willing to take on, but my plate is very full with all the building stuff that we have going on in town as well. And I know, Mr. Brady, you're interested in the role, and I know you're sincere, and I appreciate that very much. I have to say, I think we were really deliberate in postponing the reorganization a little bit because of town meeting. You're right, Dr. Hackett, we did that last year. I think that was the right thing to do this year, given some of the hurdles we thought we were facing around town meeting. This is our first public regular meeting right after town meeting, so just in the context of this conversation, I want to publicly thank Dr. Hackett. I want to thank you, Michelle. I want to thank you, Tom, and Andrew, and Peter, and everybody who kind of helped manage that budget process that got us to yes. That could have gone sideways really quickly. And so I feel like, from a distance, it seems to me like there's a good working relationship there. You've built a head of steam and some relationships, particularly around FinCom most recently, that I'm happy to see sort of continue. So, if Michelle's interested in doing it, I think that's a good energy to kind of keep moving forward. And if it goes that way, you have my full support. And Michelle does too as vice chair, for whatever issues are coming the committee's way.
I appreciate that, and I definitely feel like being in a second term probably puts you in a better position to be chair. But I think having having someone who's been in that role be with you helps make up for that, or helps me climb the learning curve faster.
Yep.
That said, everyone on the committee brings very unique and deep expertise in different areas, and so hopefully we'll have broad engagement from everyone. You mentioned EFPBC and capital and buildings and everything and whatnot. So however it goes. Anyway, other discussion on the matter? All right. Well,
I guess I'll just add, having observed the school committee for a while, I would say the trend has been historically folks will serve and then generally in their second or third year, they serve as the chair or the vice chair. That's how it's gone recently. So I'm sure, you know, going back to Mr. Nixon, that's not the case, but I think that's been the case since Michelle and Karen have been on. I think Michelle was the vice chair in her second year and the chair in her third, and I believe the same for Karen, and I believe the same for you. I was interested in vice chair last March, and at the time you were not. You and I had a conversation about it, Tom, and then we delayed, and then 3 months later you were, and I did defer to you and say, Tom, you know what, we're both interested. I'm happy to let you have that. So I feel that I have waited and I've expressed my interest, and I think I've served the committee. I did serve with the finance committee, and then I served on our finance subcommittee my first year, and that year we were also successful with our budget. So I do have that experience, and I also have the experience of going through two, I'll call them enlightening negotiation sessions with both our OTPTs and with our teachers union. And I think both of those ultimately were successful, and I feel that I did play a significant role in them. I think obviously Michelle's done an excellent job. I believe I've nominated her or seconded her for each time she's been in that role, but I do think it's time for me to have an opportunity. And in particular, I think I represent families that have two folks working full-time. I think I represent a younger generation, and I think that, you know, Tom, when you and I ran, you were elected, I was elected, you had 100 more votes than me, which I respect. I think that was the people speaking. At the same time, I only had 100 less votes than you, so we had fairly equal support. So again, I think if you're listening to people's voices, if you want different perspectives, if you want people who live in Precinct 1, if you want people from the Morocco area, so we've had folks from Ambrose, and we've had folks from VO, and now we've had folks from Lynch. It's been a long time since we've had anyone who's involved with Morocco, and I think that's important too. So I guess I'll just say all that and appreciate the consideration.
All right. Additional comments? Nope. Okay, well then, let's vote first on Ms. Bergstrom's nomination. Do I have a motion, or do I need a motion? No, just, so if I could take a vote on Ms. Bergstrom?
Aye.
Aye.
Me?
Aye.
And the chair votes aye. So that's 4-1. At that point, would you like to vote? We'll just vote both ways. Let's do a vote on Mr. Brady's nomination.
No.
Nay.
Aye.
No.
Oh, all right, so Ms. Bergstrom is elected vice chair. Congratulations, and I do hear what you're saying, and yeah, and I think it is important, and we do want to have the voices of all parts of our town represented. So I hope.
And you
that
think
we'll
I
do
would
that.
learn my lesson running against Michelle?
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, all right.
May
So-
I say something, Mr. Brady?
Yes,
before
please
we
go ahead,
vote?
Ms. Bergstrom.
So, Mr. Brady, I also, as I said at town meeting, appreciate that this is a committee of 5, not a committee of 2. So I think that you do represent the voice of your precinct, as well as every member on this committee represents different kinds of families and members all over town. And I look forward to taking other leadership roles that we have: finance committee subcommittee chair, curriculum subcommittee chair, and having your voice and your the people that you represent heard in all the ways that this committee serves the community. And we do have important decisions to make about Morocco, and there will be leadership roles to take around that will require a lot of our time going forward in the next year, and I hope that you step forward and take those.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
That was well said, Vice Chair. All right, the next order of business is I'd like to take nominations for recording secretary.
I'd like to nominate Karen.
I'd second that.
Are there any other nominations?
I
have
would,
to
ex-
accept
I would
it.
accept that. I would
Have you
accept
accepted
that.
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Any other? No? Then let's move to a vote on recording secretary. Ms. Nixon, thank you.
Aye.
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 All right. You have been elected recording secretary. Congratulations, I think.
With that, could we said we were going to, we still haven't added to our policy to what the recording secretary does. And so it's not formally in our policy. We have duties for chair and vice chair.
Yep.
So maybe policy subcommittee could propose something, and then we could bring it back to the full committee at some point.
And yeah, and your voice as the first recording secretary of this committee would be really valuable in that, and as on policy subcommittee.
I guess it's just the role we've listed as one of the positions. Okay, all right, got it. Okay, I see.
And I'm happy to help draft something.
I see what you mean. Okay.
Excellent. I think that's a great suggestion. All right, so let's get on with our meeting. We'll start with the superintendent, chair, and student remarks. Dr. Hackett, do you have?
I do. I have a few. So first of all, welcome to the new school committee room. There's only a couple of us left standing at Parkhurst now. It's pretty quiet until the children arrive, and then they leave, and then I'm just in 800 square feet by myself. So this is the next large phase of our move out of Parkhurst building. We will be completely out by the end of June. I'm going to stay in the building until the preschool is done, so that we can kind of make sure things go smoothly there. And this room actually has been outfitted. WinCam has made an investment in a new camera system, and I think this is a great space, and we will continue to work on it to try to make it better in terms of just accessibility and signage when we're meeting, that kind of thing. So, anyway, welcome. This is where we are from moving forward. National Teachers Day was today. This is National Teachers Week, so it's interesting history on National Teachers Day. I learned a lot about where it started and different dates that were selected, and the fact that it wound up here a couple of decades ago. And open enrollment opened on May 1st, and it will be closed on May 26th. So we're currently collecting the names of people who have expressed interest in open enrollment.
And Dr. Hackett, clarifying, open enrollment is within district.
Open enrollment is within district, as opposed to school choice, which is coming from other districts.
Hey, can I ask a question? Since I'm not on that elementary parent square distribution list, how is that being messaged?
We
Yeah.
got a direct message.
Yeah, it's a direct message from us where-
And I opened it up. It's a nice looking form.
yeah. So they click on a form and they go in to the form and just notice their interest.
Are you or
Don't worry, I didn't fill it out, Calder. You're good.
Are you or Andrew able to sort of monitor click-through on that? Do you have a way to know if people are actually seeing that and opening it up to learn about it?
About the form,
Yeah.
pick up hits on the form itself.
I'll click through on the form, yeah, but those who viewed the post on Parents Group can see that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Can you give us a general sense of what it's looking like now?
I've not looked at it. I've intentionally stayed away from looking at it.
I
And
understand.
I'll be as surprised on the 26th as everyone else, so
Watch it pop.
something for me to look forward to, those kinds of things I do. And that's all I have, except, I'm sorry. But also, if you don't mind, Mr. Chair, would like to turn the next section over to Dr. Alan Emma to talk about the John Riley Award and Sarah Swiger Award.
Thank you. So we are thrilled that Erica Guggenberger, for those of you who know her, our McCall, one of our McCalls, 7th grade world geography teachers. And if you've ever been in her classroom, you would know exactly why she won this award. It is in her letter talking about her strengths. It really is an immersive experience. It is not geography the way I learned it in school. It is all about the kind of repeats throughout history, what happens and what people are drawn to and how cultures are formed. And there's so much where students can bring their own pieces in. There's tons of technology as well as kind of low-tech manipulatives they use. There's just always engagement going on in that classroom, and she was recommended by several people in district, and she was chosen for the award. So congratulations to Erica, and this is a great thing for Winchester as well, to have the geography teacher here. Any questions on that?
The award ceremony already happened, correct?
Yes. Okay, Sarah Swiger Award, and let me just pull up the date for that. Next week.
May 18th.
May 18th, thank you. All are welcome to the Sarah Swiger Award at the Sanborn House, and it starts at 4, and it goes until 6, although, so you know, the pieces kind of highlighting the teachers will be from about, probably plan to be there 4:15, 4:20, anyone who's coming. And that piece will be over probably a little bit after 5, and there'll be time to visit with the teachers and see what else, congratulate them and hear them sharing with each other. Often, teachers from previous years that have won are there, so it's also great to talk to them about it. And there's, they always get a small fund to put something back into the district, and they've done some really cool things with it. So when everybody's there, it's great to hear about the different things that have been done in the past. And some of the people, since they've known for about, was it like a month ago, maybe? So they may already have an idea of what they want to do, so you can also ask them. So please join us for everyone who can attend. And we would love to have all and any, and WIFI has, again, done a fabulous job with it, so.
So Dr. Elenema, can you just take a minute and remind the committee how these folks are selected? There's like a nomination process by peers, am I right?
Great point, yep. They're always nominated by their peers, and then they are, they spend a lot of time kind of going through those references, and then they also often talk with previous winners. So they have a little committee that's together, that, as well as the WIFI people, that decide who they will be this year. They've done a really nice job of choosing someone from each level, so. All right, hope to see you, thank you.
Great. So I've just very brief chair remarks. As I mentioned before, as we were doing the tribute for our student representatives, we, Ms. Bergstrom and Ms. O'Connor and Mr. Savage and I had the opportunity to go down and meet with the Mass Association of School Committees and attend a session where we were briefed on all of their legislative priorities, and then we went over to Beacon Hill and met with Senators Lewis, Jalen, and senior staff for Rep Day. And it was, as I said, really great. Elle and Charlie led most of the discussions, I think. We talked about circuit breaker and MSBA funding and incentives for teachers, teacher attraction and retention, and MCAS, and a whole bunch of other issues. And so it was just a really nice day. So I wanted to acknowledge that. I also wanted to just let the committee members know that the next WinPAC meeting is coming up on the 15th at 3:30. And so I encourage folks that are interested in that. And I want to put out to the committee members if anyone had any additional updates that they wanted to share with the committee. Yeah.
Just wanted to acknowledge that it is Mental Health Month, and then also Asian American Pacific Islanders History Month, and there will be a celebration May 17th at the Griffin Museum in the afternoon. I think it's 5 p.m.
Great. Thank you.
Can
go ahead. Yes.
I have something I want to say, but I actually want to make it a question in case Mr. Betancourt, who's here, has the answer. Because town meeting did approve the funding for the Lynch Neighborhood Traffic Safety Project, not quite the way it was printed in the warrant, but it's going to move forward. Beth Rudolph, I think, had indicated there would be other meetings. So, if with your permission, does Mike actually know? Is there like a timeline? Is there, because summer's coming? Do we know if the Lynch community would be engaged soon, or maybe that's a fall thing? Totally putting you on the spot, but I know that's going to happen, right?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. That's all right, Tom, for me to answer. I think it's going to happen soon, and I think we anticipate over the summer and into the fall as well, just because we don't want people to think, oh, we had all these meetings when people were away or something and then not have input. But I imagine, like we did last time, they will be virtual and in person as well. So that process will start, and as you know, that there was money in the stabilization fund to move forward with the project, so it will move forward, I think, fairly quickly.
So I appreciate that. I mean, I'll just reach out to the town manager's office, because once there are, like, once there's a schedule for that, just as we did on the project website for that initial round of just concepts, we'll put that on the project website, and maybe we can use Parent Square. Just, I think it'd be really important to get neighborhood input, particularly if those meetings drag into the summer.
Great, thank you. Student remarks.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Oh, one more.
Thank you. Many people probably know, but there was recently a house fire right down the street from Morocco. So first, I want to just be thankful that everyone was okay, and our fire department did a great job, and a community member alerted folks in the area, and so everyone was safe. And then I want to acknowledge that the Morocco staff did a great job helping the children, because that was obviously upsetting for different children who encountered it in different ways, and then what they're thinking about it. And then also just note that there is a GoFundMe fundraising, and so that is posted on the Winchester community Facebook, or if anyone doesn't use Facebook or wants that information, they're welcome to contact me or probably other committee members, because we just do want to make sure that that family is taken care of in their time of need. And it has been inspiring to see how many folks have already donated, so that's exciting. And then I just wanted to also remind our committee members of graduation is coming up, and I think, each year we seem to get more school committee members at graduation, and I know Mr. Mahoney would love to have all 5, so if folks can check their calendars and do their very best to be there, I think that would be a nice, especially for Elle and Charlie, to get all 5 school committee members at their graduation, because that hasn't happened in some time. So just putting that plug out there on behalf of Mr. Mahoney.
Thank you, Mr. Brady. That's a great suggestion. All right, so now over to Ms. O'Connor and Mr. Savage for what may be their final student report.
One last quick thing.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I forgot. Teachers Appreciation Week. I feel like we've been celebrating Teachers Appreciation Week at some schools last week, and then also over at the elementary level this week. So, but just a big thank you to all of our educators and staff in town. So, thank you.
Thank you. All right. Now over to.
Sorry about that.
Dr. Ellen, I think you're going to have to share your microphone this week.
Of course. You know what? You guys just keep it.
Ooh. All right. Thank you so much for having us. As you guys said, I believe this will be, sadly, our final student remarks. I think we'd just like to say thank you so much. We'll end with that.
Yeah.
All right. We'll end with that. First, I'd like to start off by just talking about the Day on the Hill. That was one of the most amazing experiences I've had throughout my 4 years of high school. To be able to talk to senators and have them be so friendly, it was amazing how friendly they were to us. It was just really, really a great experience, and to be able to bring up issues at our school to, the upper levels of the government was really amazing, and I really enjoyed the experience. I think Elle did too, if you want to talk about that.
Yeah, just to echo what Charlie said, just seeing how available they are, and I know we also talked about how we can just go to the State House and sit in on a conference if we ever wanted to, or if a topic ever interested us, was just something that I never thought about. So just seeing how close they are in terms of if we have any questions or just if we're interested about anything was really just eye-opening.
Along with that, we have a few events that happened and a few events coming up. Recently we had our, how many years is that?
It's the 6th.
I think the 6th annual Night of the Arts, which was huge success. Turnout wasn't as amazing as we expected, however, it was late on a Friday night. So great to see so many of our students' art on display. We have some really, really talented students here at WHS, and it was really great to showcase their pieces.
And as was stated earlier, we have our student council elections on Thursday for all officer positions, and that will include 2 new school committee representatives. So we'll let you know about that on Thursday night or Friday morning, depending on the polls. And elections also mean that we have a lot of these senior events coming up at the end of the year. Just a quick plug for something that Charlie and I have been doing for the past 3 years. We've been coordinating with Gift of Life, which is a nonprofit organization that recruits potential donators of bone marrow and stem cells to save blood cancer patients. We will be having a swab drive during the senior class dinner, which is May 25th. And this one's especially special to us because it is our class who will be donating. And we also have recruited 2 new students who will carry the drives after we graduate, one of whose family was actually impacted by this foundation, and one of her family members was actually a match through Gift of Life. So it is also very important to her. And yeah, so we're really excited by that event, and we're always excited to see sort of the curiosity that binds all of our peers.
Yeah, and that's anybody, I believe, aged 18 to 65?
To 35.
35,
donations.
sorry. 35 for donations.
Yes.
And then we just like to end it by saying thank you guys so much for everything that you've done for us, everything we've learned here. You know, like you said, this role has grown so much since we started. You know, we came writing out a script with a few things we did that week, and now we get to, give our input on topics, and it's been really, really amazing. A super valuable experience.
Yeah, this opportunity has just truly been something that we will never forget and will carry for the next stage. Yeah, so thank you guys so
Thank you.
much.
Thank you.
So I have a couple comments, and are you with the Senator's office? Excellent. So just before that, one, it feels great to hear how impactful that experience was for you. And I kept thinking, you can, a lot of opportunities in college, and it reminded me that Senator Jalen gave you a little bit of homework.
Yes.
And that she offered to help you guys write up your experience with the project-based assessments. And so I encourage you to take her up on that offer.
And has followed up with an email to me to check in with you about it.
Oh.
Get started right after AP tests.
So she's going to hold you to it, too.
All right.
So I don't know if you'd like to come and present or read
my name is Rob Saylor. I met you two a few days ago. So this is probably not that big of a surprise, but I'm from the office of State Senator Jason Lewis, and he heard about your involvement in the school committee and was really impressed, and you talked to him already. But as a result of your service for the school committee, and because not only he cares about Winchester in his capacity of representing Winchester, but also because he's the chair of the Senate Committee on Education, he wanted to officially recognize you. So on behalf of both the Senator and the entire Massachusetts Senate, I wanted to present you both with these citations. And they are in recognition of your outstanding work and exemplary service as student representatives for the Winchester School Committee.
Of course, the parents can come forward.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Congratulations.
That was perfectly timed.
Let me give you the folders as well, just because they can get damaged pretty easily. Never go anywhere without a cell folder.
Those folders.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Wow.
Thank you.
All right.
This is so good.
And we know that you guys have a test tomorrow. Is that right? So you're welcome to stay for as long as you want, but the important part of the meeting is
Gotcha.
taken care of with regard to you guys if you need to go study.
All right.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Shall we make her?
All right.
We'll see you guys again Next week.
2 weeks.
2 weeks.
Right. 2 weeks.
All right.
Thank you guys.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Good luck on the
Thank
exam.
you.
Good luck on those tests. Woo.
And anyone's welcome to stay as long as they want to watch the exam. I don't mean to kick you out. All right, so let's move on. The next item is our consent agenda. So unless anyone wants to remove any of the items from the consent agenda, I'd be happy to just take a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented. I'm happy to read it if you want, but in the interest of time, you'll have it. Thank you. Do we have
Second.
A second? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay. So the ayes have it.
Should we wait for Ms. Bergstrom to come back?
No, we're
I
good.
think
We
we have
voted
it.
it. We have it.
I think it's
We're
fine.
moving.
I did want to note that there is a $3,000 WIFI grant in the folder, and we'll put that on the agenda for the next meeting. We just voted. Can we record your vote on the consent agenda? Sorry.
For what she asked.
She can't vote. She wasn't here. She can't vote after the fact. Robert's rules.
Very well. Very well.
I'm okay. I'm pretty sure it got
We know what
passed.
you would have voted.
All right.
And it passed 4-0.
So I tried. I
Wasn't even
tried.
close.
All right, so moving on to reports, updates, and action items. We have some guests that are going to join us, I believe, at 7:15. I think we're still waiting for one. So I wanted to jump ahead on the agenda, if I could, down to if I could go all the way down to consideration of maintaining all fees. Ms. Bergstrom, do you want to?
Sure. So at a previous meeting, we had discussed how the Finance Subcommittee had looked at the fees for this year when we were discussing the FY24 budget, and that we felt maintaining the fees at the current rate for this year made it able for us to put forward the budget that we put forward at town meeting. So our recommendation was that we hold fees level for this year, but that we begin a conversation for FY25, because there were some areas, particularly around athletics. We had talked a little bit about preschool fees, and then an even broader discussion, we considered art and music and what our fees were around that. So Dr. Hackett had recommended that we have a working group or set up some kind of larger discussion this year about fees for FY25, but that we hold them steady for FY24. So that would be the recommendation.
So I have a clarifying question. We've already voted fees for preschool,
Yep.
right? And that actually was an increase, my memory serves, right? For next school year? I thought we'd had a modest increase.
Kept it level.
We did. Oh,
We
that's good.
discussed keeping a steady increase for preschool, but that would be part of the larger fees discussion.
Okay.
We discussed that for parents, it might
Okay.
be, is that sounding familiar now?
Okay.
We'd suggest 3% year over year for preschool.
And I mean, I remember we had that conversation probably January or February because of the timing of the lottery, so I just wanted to be sure any action on our part on fees isn't in conflict with anything we decided around preschool. Second question, what's the timeliness of us making a decision on this, Dr. Hackett?
For next year?
For fees, so thinking about music fees, athletic fees, yes, for next
For
year.
25?
For next school year. In other words, is it coming forward because we got our budget, we came out of town meeting, this seems like a natural thing for us to act on? Or is there a timeliness issue to this?
There's not a timeliness issue from my perspective. My recommendation would be to hold on fees at the rates that they're at right now for next year, and then have a fuller conversation about just fees in general. I think similar to stipends, the work that was done with the stipend committee around the negotiated contract. I think it'd be good for us to really just kind of reset and then look to see where we are. Preschool in particular will need some catch-up work or it's some conversation around what is the expectation of the percentage of the preschool cost should be covered by fees.
Right.
And I think, we certainly have the data to look around to see what other programs are like. So I just think it would be kind of an all-encompassing conversation as opposed to kind of one-offing some of the pieces of this.
So the reason I asked that question is we still have a ways to go before we close out this year. We have in-migration, we have out-migration. Sometimes that comes like special ed costs that were unanticipated and so forth. there still could yet be, surprise retirements, right, that could affect us positively on the budget side. So that's why I'm wondering, unless there's a timeliness issue, is this something we need to do now, or are we better served if we, first of all, I'm all in favor of the deep dive on fees in a few months.
Right.
I don't want to be raising fees. I'm actually 100% with Mr. Brady. If I felt comfortable now just saying we should drop everything 5% across the board, I would make that motion. But I'm not there yet. But we might also have some costs that hit us that we're not anticipating on May 9th. That has happened to this district in the past. We've had some surprise costs come in. So my question to you, Dr. Hackett, would be, if we wanted to postpone this decision, even though we're all of one mind about the action we want to take, when would we actually need to vote?
I think it really comes down to communications to parents and families. So I would say that the train has left the station on preschool.
Sure.
Because we've already gone through that registration, continue to.
And we've literally voted on fees for preschool. Right.
So I think it really just comes down to how much notice do we want to give families about any increases in fees? And I would say that we want to do that before the end of the school year, so that we can communicate that out so people can plan.
I just want to note, I really appreciate Michelle's point. I had brought up before that Arlington doesn't charge for athletic fees, and people can debate how different we are from Arlington. That's fine. And to her point as well, music, the arts. I really hope that next year we'll take a real hard look at the student fees and the totality of the Winchester town budget. And, is it really important in our budget, which is what?
A lot.
How many million is our town budget,
Yeah.
Mr. Nixon?
Over 60.
Oh my gosh.
No, our town budget, not our school, our town budget.
I can tell you ICE costs 7% of the athletic budget. I'm into those weeds.
Anyways, I think we all know our town budget either approaches 100 million or exceeds 100 million, right? So we saw that Mr. Rose showed us athletic fees generate roughly 600,000. So that's less than 1% of the entire town's budget. So is it worth half a budget percent to charge all these families for all this? And I can't imagine if we put in music and the arts, how much more that would put that up, but still, I can't imagine it's going to go over $1 million. So can we spend 1% of our $100 million budget to make sure that all our kids and all our families are just there, and they don't even have to think about it? And I know we support people who can't necessarily do it, but there's a cost there even in making them ask and making them feel other, that, oh, well, this is something I'd like to do, I can't afford it, so I need to email so-and-so and get it waived. Kids realize that, especially high school kids. I've been in that position. It doesn't feel great, so I think I really appreciate Michelle's point, and I just hope we'll work really hard on that next year, because I think it's something we can do. If Arlington can do it, I have a lot of pride in Arlington. I'm from there, live there, my family still lives there, but if Arlington can do it, I'm confident Winchester can do it. So
I think you articulate very well the reason we want to have a broader look at this across all the fees to figure out what makes the most sense.
So my preference,
yeah.
Mr. Chair, just given what Dr. Hackett said, my preference would be just to wait like a month. That's still before the end of the school year. Surprises can happen. They have in the past. Even if the recommendation is just hold everything steady, that's fine. But we could make that decision with a month's more worth of information. It, to me, feels like sort of the safer move to make. If there's no urgency to make the decision now, but I'm totally on board with the recommendation, both present day to hold, and I'm with Mr. Brady on the deep dive on fees.
Dr. Hackett, do you have a perspective
That's
on
fine.
that?
As I said, I'd be fine.
Is the committee comfortable with that?
yeah, June 13th, put it on the agenda.
As long as
It'll be quick.
that you feel like that gives Mr. Ria enough time, because I know fall sports come up really quickly.
If the conversation were to be increasing fees, then that would give us plenty of notice.
Okay.
I'm more concerned about the families than us managing on our end.
Can we also message that preschool is settled then as well? Because I don't want parents being concerned if we're saying we're holding on this.
Yeah, we already voted that,
What we're holding
right?
on is athletics fees and transportation fees, is that correct? I want to be clear what we're holding on.
And music.
Parking fee?
Fees other than preschool.
Fees other than
Fees other than
preschool.
preschool.
That works
Yeah.
for me.
Great. All right, we will come back to that on June 13th. Next, I'm just going to finish out the section and then jump back up. I think everyone's here now, but we have just one more item. Or I guess it doesn't matter. I could do it either way, but I think this is a quick item. So, Dr. Hackett, do you want to just? I hope it's a quick item.
Quick item is the kiss of death.
You want to talk about Parker?
Can we move on to-
I think from my perspective, you might want to have a little bit of conversation around this item.
Yeah.
We're talking about 5D, the consideration of start times.
I would
so
like to.
It
Okay.
may be
Okay.
good to
Then-
move to the.
Then we'll move
lunch
up.
update.
All right. All right, with that, we are going to move back to the top of the section of the agenda. And so this is our Lynch update on solar. As you know, we received a recommendation from the EFPBC about solar for the new net zero Lynch building. And so we've invited Mr. Gerald J. Nardone, chair of the EFPBC, Mark Scott, chair of the EFPBC's Sustainability Committee, and Ken Pruitt, Sustainability Director for the town, to join us. Mr. Nardone is going to give us an update and answer questions specifically regarding how the power purchase agreement options differ from your purchasing outright and things like that. We're not voting on this tonight. We're going to hear their updates. And I understand that there's been some more recent developments and information, and have an opportunity to ask questions and talk. So I definitely appreciate all the work that the FPBC has done. I've gone to a few meetings, but they are very frequent, very detailed, and very long, and we appreciate everything that you guys do. So I'll turn it over to you, Jay.
Well, thank you for the invite. I know we kind of blindsided the committee and a few committees a couple weeks ago with a letter with a recommendation for PPA with on the solar for the Lynch to try to move the project along and keep with the architect's schedule. It brought up more conversation than we thought we were going to have, thinking everything was already settled. So I think, Chris, do you have a presentation to show the timeline of?
I'm happy to, and I'm doing this with my mouse connected to Dr. Hackett's computer.
All right.
So you may have to help me here if this doesn't work. Let's see. Can you hit the escape button or cancel me out of this? Right, there we go. Let's see if this works. Okay. So we just have like 5 or 6 talking points tonight, some things that we want to hit and really tee up some thoughtful remarks from Mark Scott. Mark is he's the architect representative to the EFPBC. He's jointly appointed by the school committee and the select board. Mark's also the chair of the sustainability subcommittee on the Lynch project. So what we wanted to do is just very quickly review some history of the project that we've touched on quite a lot actually over the past year, but it might be helpful to revisit. So with respect to the history of solar scope and net zero energy goals, you've heard us, I think, in many instances talk about our aspiration to learn from our experience on Vincent Owen. So when Vincent Owen was in design, we were approached by the town through the energy management coordinator asking us to accommodate solar for the Vincent Owen Elementary School. And at that time, the EFPBC said, give us some design criteria. And that includes things like structural, design loading, dead load, and so forth. There was no design criteria. So it was sort of an aspirational goal, if you will, to include solar, but we didn't really have any granular information. So in fact, what the EFPBC did at that time, in the absence of information to really design for solar, was to add some structural capacity to the classroom wing for the future. But the long span spaces like the cafeteria, the gymnasium, went without any sort of additional structural support because there were too many blanks, too many unknowns in the engineering, if you will. So the good news is we had some capacity to add solar later to VO. The bad news is we couldn't really maximize all of the roof. So from the very beginning, we didn't want to repeat that mistake. Also, when we first put this RFP out, and even the walkthrough on site with town staff, including our town engineer, now town manager, we were really clear that at the very least, Lynch would be net zero ready. And what that means is not that we would punt so that later on somebody could come back and figure out how to incorporate solar, but that we would be thoughtful in terms of design, planning, and engineering to literally make it happen, to set that stage. And when we said at least net zero ready, we also explained that the town's practice had been to use power purchase agreements. We've, the school committee has approved PPAs for VO and the high school, so we'll talk more about that in a moment. And, you know, we said that's certainly one way that we do it. When you follow a PPA, there's no upfront cost to the project or the town. And, you know, when you're maximizing solar, when you're balancing generation with building use, that's how you get to net zero. And then along these lines, going really back to the fall, there was a commitment on the part of the EFPBC for design and planning that's integrated. So what are we talking about? So we did actually, we have a sustainability consultant that is actually just, was it today, Jay and Mark, just issued their updated energy model?
After lunch?
Like today.
Clear. It wasn't early morning.
It was today. Yeah, talk about fastballs. So March 28th was a major milestone in this project. It was the design development submission to the MSBA. So hundreds of drawings, architectural, you know, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, engineering, site, civil. And so on the basis of this much more advanced stage of design, Andelman and Lalick, who is our sustainability consultant, has now generated an updated energy model. So what does that mean? It means they're sort of calculating based on the building that's designed according to the drawings, and also to Dr. Hackett and Mr. Marin's, you know, sort of wheelhouse. How is the building going to be operated, right? So hours of operation, days of the week, months of the year have a big impact on how much energy a building needs. So we have that updated model, and we wanted to be sure that through maximizing the rooftop for solar, and this is just a modeling tool you see an image of, what else would we need to do to get to net zero? And it was clear, I think, Mike Betancourt was in on some conversations way back in September. We knew at that time the roof was only going to get us like 60% there. So you make up the difference through ground-mounted solar, like we think canopies that you can park underneath. We were concerned there might have been some pushback to that, you know, maybe aesthetically or what have you. There has been none. So there's been, the Lynch community has been supportive, EFPBC has been supportive. Nobody on the school committee has ever expressed a concern. If anything, I think people are sort of excited about it. And a number of options were developed for ground-mounted canopies. They were discussed with the subcommittee. Subcommittee made a recommendation to the EFPBC to include some in what we will call kind of primetime areas, because these are something we kind of want to celebrate. And on the basis of that, you know, our architect, who you all have met, Charlie Hay from TAP A, is including in the base project excavation, trenching, conduit for future ground-mounted canopies, even though those canopies are not in the project. With respect to the roof, Mr. Scott actually was the one who kind of made that motion to the committee. The committee fully supported actually increasing the tonnage of steel so that we can actually support solar loaded across the entire roof, and there's a significant premium for that as well. So all in, and I think we mentioned this in the memo that went out like 3 weeks ago, there's about $800,000 of project costs that we've already invested into this project to make solar happen. Regardless of how it is procured, that is a sizable investment. So if we go to procurement methods, there are two. Sorry, I'm doing this with my wheel here. You have a power purchase agreement, and you have direct ownership. So again, with a PPA, that's like a lease agreement. Only the school committee is party to a PPA with a vendor. And I'll clarify that in a few minutes. But it basically is the school committee saying, we don't have a problem. We will lease our rooftop or our site to a third-party solar vendor, who then takes on the cost of the system. And in exchange for that lease, the town gets the benefit of reduced electrical bills. So there is a savings. And that's part of the certainty of this model that Mark will speak to in just a moment. Power purchase agreements typically last for 20 years. We voted them at VO and at the high school. Power purchase agreements, again, are between the school committee and a vendor. The select board and management have a role to play in the process, but it's actually not with the PPA. So we'll talk about that in just a moment. The other pathway is direct ownership. So what does that mean? It just means, well, if you have the money, if you want to just buy all of the infrastructure, then you're not paying a reduced rate on your utility bill. You can like operate the building for free, basically. So the energy you're generating is going into the building. It's a huge upfront cost, but massive year-over-year impacts on utility bills. And although the district no longer gets utility bills, we did once upon a time, for, I don't know, 20 years now, they go to the town. we certainly recognize we have a significant share, right, in utility costs in Winchester. So having said all that, we want to review, speaking of costs, the decision that the MSBA board made in November and December that got a little bit of mention at town meeting might be leading to some confusion. You may recall from fall town meeting, we had announced that in recognition of the cost of escalation in construction, the MSBA took really the unprecedented step in October of suspending for the entire fiscal year the green repair program. Now that pays for efficient heating systems, windows, roof repair. $76 million that had been encumbered for that program suddenly got freed up. That was in anticipation of them then doing something with that money. That decision came after fall town meeting, but you may recall from our January 10th discussion, we shared the welcome news that in December, I think it was on the 21st, the board voted to increase the cost per square foot construction, that there's a cap of construction costs per square foot that they will reimburse districts. And this is where maybe there has been some confusion. The MSBA did not change the project budget. The net impact of this decision is a big deal. It means we can borrow up to $2.9 million less. But it's not because they increased the budget by $2.9 million. Let's say Lynch costs, I'm going to round numbers if that's okay, Mark. Let's say Lynch costs $600 a foot. And the MSBA would only reimburse at $330 a foot. If you're a struggling community financially with whom the MSBA is partnered, and they're going to give you 100% reimbursement on eligible expenses. That means the MSBA will give your district $330 a foot. They're going to give you 100% of what they deem eligible. But that's the upset limit, was that $330. And in Winchester, it's not 100. We're like 36.21, I think. They did in December is they raised that limit by about $30. So everybody with whom they're partnering is getting their reimbursement rate times that higher cap. So what we're getting effectively is that 36.21% reimbursement rate times that extra, money that they're basically allowing as a reimbursable. So want to be sure everybody sort of understood that. There's no change to the project scope and budget agreement. I think Meg White is here. She can sort of explain that if there are further questions about it. We did our best to explain this on the project website. I think we reviewed this in January. What changed because of the MSBA vote in December is what's highlighted. So no change in construction costs, no change in project budget, no change in project scope. The grant gets bigger, and at the end of the day, our net project cost comes down. And that's a good thing. So, back to process real quick. To give you some perspective, we were approached by Susan McPhee, our energy management coordinator, back in the spring of 18, April or May. And that's when we first started talking about VO and actually Ambrose as well. And by October, because the school committee was open to a power purchase agreement, the school committee actually approved a PPA for VO on October 2nd of 2018. And to give you an indication of how quickly this happens, then by fall town meeting, the select board had their pilot agreement in place on the warrant. So pilot is payment in lieu of taxes. A pilot agreement is the instrument by which the power purchase agreement vendor actually gets paid by the town. So clearly, if the school committee is talking about a power purchase agreement, Meg White is aware of it, she's working on it, management knows about it, there's an awareness around the select board table and an appreciation that sort of this was the path that we were taking. Once you get an executed power purchase agreement, then the select board working with management brought forward a pilot agreement to town meeting. Then subsequently at Winchester High School, where we had some roof issues associated with construction, we acted a little bit later, so that was December of 18. And so that pilot agreement from the select board appeared on the warrant for spring 2019 town meeting. So wanted to give you that from a sense of timing, because if the school committee should support a power purchase agreement, we feel like there's a long runway here. So the urgency really isn't around necessarily pulling the documents together, but I'll say that carefully so I don't get a dirty look from Meg, because I know it takes a lot of work. The issue is really more about coordination and design, which Mark is going to speak about. So I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Scott about why it is that we sort of making this recommendation, and then we have some closing thoughts. And Ken, can you pass the mic down to Mark, please?
Thanks. So in our discussions as the EFPBC, the issues that we were focusing on primarily were making sure that this project gets done and meets the goals that have been set by the town, by the school committee. And one of those goals, as very clearly stated to us in a meeting in September by Mike Betancourt, was this will be a net zero project. We had already been planning with the design team what that meant, how we would achieve that with a combination of site solar, roof-mounted solar. And for us, looking forward to September of this year when construction documents are complete for the Lynch School, for us, the two most important elements are, one, the certainty that solar gets installed on the project, ideally as close to opening as possible. You know, if we could have our way, it would be by opening of the building. Whether that happens, we'll see. But, you know, we want to make good on the promise that this will be a net zero building. That's the certainty side of things. Then the timing side of things, as an architect, I recognize that for us to complete our work as an architectural practice, the thing that we need most early is information. We need to know what's going in the project, where it's going, and that way we can work with our consultants and the rest of our design team to make sure that the project is fully coordinated. In the case of a photovoltaic system for this building, there are a number of elements that were easy to incorporate early in the process. Mr. Nixon mentioned making sure that the roof can support 15 to 25 additional pounds per square foot. But there are other elements, such in particular when we have site-mounted solar, we have canopies, we have runs of conduit below paved areas and below garden areas. The more we know about that stuff, or the more TAPE knows about that, and the more their consultants know about it, the better that they can coordinate all of that stuff. So from our standpoint as a committee, thinking about shepherding this project to the finish, it feels to us that there's great value to the project, that we have certainty of a path sooner, and the sooner that that certainty arrives, the better, the more likely it is that the design team coordinates everything effectively so that when the project gets built, we minimize the amount of work that gets redone after things have already been put in place. So the recommendation for the PPA was based on prior history in the town, knowing that it was could be a relatively rapid process that could get us to a place where we would have certainty that a solar PV system would be on the building sooner rather than later. There's a whole bunch of other information that has to do with the financing of the project and the finances for the town and the long-term impacts that were not the focus of the EFPBC discussion. We didn't feel like that was really part of our remit. So we focused on getting the project done, what's the best way to get the project done. We feel like the PPA is a process that's familiar to the town and that gets us the information quickly and effectively so that we can deliver the project that has been promised to Winchester.
Can I add that PPAs, so you know, they typically last 20 years. The other certainty is there's no cost to us. I mean, it doesn't cost us anything to enter into a PPA. In fact, what we're getting is a benefit of reduced electrical bills. At the end of a PPA, and we had this conversation, Ken, I think you were part of this last August, you basically inherit, if you will. The vendor sort of walks away from it, and you can say, okay, now we own a solar system on a building. That's great, but you know, a roof has to be replaced eventually. So is that a liability? In some projects, the cost of removing an array, which by that point they may not be as efficient, there may be newer technology, the cost of removing an array and then putting a new one in can actually be rolled into a successor power purchase agreement. Alternatively, an institutional owner could say, okay, I'm happy with the PPA that I had, now I'm ready to do something new, and this time I want to own it. It's important for us to realize that although we went with a PPA for VO, if the town wished, we could have direct purchased it. I mean, there's all sorts of needs, as we know from town meeting. We could have direct purchased a system for the high school. But there's an immediacy, right, of going with the PPA. So then I'd like to just bring up the last point, if I can do it without messing up my presentation tonight. Frank, can you just jump forward one slide? Okay, I'm just gonna, I wanna stand so I can't look, because I can't look through Jay's head. I don't wanna mess this up. So my sense is there may be some consternation or a feeling that we're maybe pressuring the school committee into making a choice. So what we wanted to be clear tonight is we don't see this as a choice between this or that, meaning it's not a choice between a PPA or direct ownership. This is really about saying yes and supportive of the PPA process, which we've done in the past. That does not preclude a direct purchase. The school committee, because we're the ones that are party to PPAs, we're the only body that can say, okay, we support a PPA. But on the flip side, we don't control the purse strings like Mike and his colleagues do, and there are conversations with Ms. Rudolph. If the select board sees value in terms of long-term ownership and return on investment, if the board feels there's value and management feels there's value in direct owning as an alternative to a PPA, that's a really helpful conversation for the select board to have. And that can happen. If the school committee, but because we don't control those purse strings, right? We don't have $3.5 million for a solar system, and to Mark's point, neither does the EFPBC. EFPBC didn't feel like it was its position to say it must be this or it must be that. This is sort of our recommendation. You know, my hope tonight is that we can find a way to reach some sort of consensus that says, okay, yes, we've done this before. We understand the value of doing this. This is something we would be agreeable to. If the committee can get to that point, if not tonight, soon, I hope we can get there very quickly, then I think when Mr. Betancourt and his colleagues have this conversation with the town manager, I think it's helpful for that board to understand there's two paths. The school committee has given a green light to one of them, and so that's a way to get there. There is an alternative, and Mark just alluded to that. So Jay has been working hard with TAPE and TAPE's sub-consultants and getting some information together around that very issue, so cost of ownership and return on investment and so forth. But I'm sort of sitting here actually wearing both hats. I take off my EFPBC hat and put on my school committee hat for a minute. I really feel like that is a decision really for the select board, but we can certainly share the information, only because I wouldn't feel comfortable as a school committee member saying to the select board, well, you have to go pay for this, or you have to go pay for that. There would be a process for that. So we hope that this is helpful. There are just two ways to get there. PPA is a process we've been through before, has a lot of benefits. And to Mark's point on timing, Charlie really needs some sort of decision by midsummer in terms of just coordination. And so that would be really helpful. Also, if we're going to go with a PPA, you think back to the timeline I showed you earlier, we could be in a position to execute a PPA. The select board could bring a pilot agreement for fall town meeting, if that was the direction that the select board was also comfortable with. So I don't know if I've left anything out. And Jay, do you want to say anything about, you know, sort of some of the work you've been doing in the background around the cost of ownership piece? And
Right.
I think Ken may have something to share just about which way he's blowing in the wind on this.
I think coming from it, we're all thinking of the PPAs. There's a lot of us that are not fans of the PPA. It's an investment group. But looking at it in a school or a public building, you have to look at it two different ways. That's why it was so hard to get these numbers to, and I don't even know if they're 100%. If we do it under the project as a direct cost, we are paying more for everything because it's a public project if it gets rolled in. So it's not going to be the same wattage.
I'm sorry, do you mean more up front, Jay?
Yes, prevailing wages, everything, it's all done as part of the school project. The PPA don't follow that because they're leasing us a piece of equipment. So doing the return on investment for the PPA, what their investment's shorter than the school's investment. It's going to cost us more to do it as part of the project, as much as we would hate to give that up. So you're looking at two return on investments that don't really coincide with each other when they run out. So that's the toughest part of comparing the two. And the contractors, as part of the project, will be part of our architect, will be part of the site contractor that's doing the site. Everyone has to get rolled into the project instead of a separate company coming in and doing the job afterwards on the PPA.
And I don't want to get too granular, but there was one important point we should probably reiterate, is that we are required, if to hit our lead point target, we knew months ago, actually last September, we knew we would need to incorporate into this project about 1,700 square feet of solar. So there's a very small kind of ground-mounted canopy, not that you park under, but it's near the main entrance of the school. And that was kind of the initial move on the part of the design team, that's how we could, we have to actually own that. That has to be a part of the actual project. So if there's no PPA, no direct ownership, you have some bolus of solar for the project. We were pleased to find a way, as we got into design development, to actually pivot. So you all are aware of that third floor classroom, the outdoor classroom concept for the upper grades. There's kind of there's a canopy structure above that. We were actually able to move that array. We sort of take that concept was those would be photovoltaic arrays. It's around 5,000 square feet. So we were able to find a way to get that into the base project. So we are just on the topic of investment. You know, we're required to own 1,700 square feet. We found a way to get it up to 5,000 square feet. So it's just sort of, I think, a reflection of how hard the team is working to sort of do the right thing and make some design moves if we can afford it, that it increases that investment in renewables. Can we just ask Ken for a moment, because he's been sitting silent?
Thank you. Ken Pruitt, Sustainability Director. So I think that I'd start off just by saying, you know, I think it's important to take a step back and focus on the positive for a minute. This will be the town's first net zero building of any kind. It'll also be the town's not just institutional, but the first parking canopy solar anywhere in town, which I think is a very positive thing, and it'll set the tone going forward and show people, including skeptics who might think in concept that parking canopy solar is ugly, that when they see it in person, they actually like it quite a bit. That's been the experience in other communities. So I want to point out those two positive things. I'll just say that from a sustainability standpoint, you know, the decision that you're grappling with at this point is kind of irrelevant. It's really a financial decision. One way or the other, the building is net zero, regardless of ownership versus PPA. And I think one thing to clarify, really the only reason that this is sort of coming up late in the game in the middle of design is that until last August, essentially all municipal solar projects were PPAs. And that was because, what changed last August is the president signed the Inflation Reduction Act into law, which changed the renewable energy investment tax credit from only a tax credit for entities that need to pay taxes to, in the case of municipalities, there's now a direct pay option. So municipalities can now capture 30% more value in terms of federal payments for a project like this, which obviously dramatically changes the economics. But that, you know, really wasn't sussed out in terms of what it would mean until, you know, sometime in the fall, and technically there's still some rules from the Treasury Department that we're waiting for. But I think going forward, it's almost going to be a no-brainer to purchase these systems because of the economics. But, you know, to sort of echo what Mark was saying, I think the real issue here is just the concern I would have would be just the certainty of ensuring that we have a plan for these solar arrays soon enough that, you know, again, as Mark said, we don't have to sort of rip up some of the work that we've done and then reinstall. But, ultimately, it really is just a financial decision at this point, and can it be made one way or the other quickly enough that we can incorporate the design into the project?
And can I add too, with respect to that tax credit, that's the new angle that Ken just described. One of the prerequisites to the tax credit is that all of the steel that's used to support the system, that includes the building steel, has to be of 100% domestic content.
But that's true for the whole project already.
I'm sorry?
That's true for the whole Lynch project.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's our understanding, yes. Although, Chinese steel, has a big impact on the market in some parts of the country, that not too big of an impact here in New England, but much of our steel does come from Canada. So the project estimate of both schematic and design development was market rate. Market rate means it's coming from Canada. And if we were to say, well, we need 100% domestic content, our estimators have said you can expect about a 10% premium. That's about a $360,000 hit in terms of project cost to the budget. I hope perhaps that's not insurmountable, but we have some things that we're already working on now hard to get into the project, like the pedestrian bridge over Horn Pond Brook is technically still below the line. There were conversations with the MSBA, I think, just last week, so that they understand our goal. We are committed to make that bridge happen. That's an expensive bridge. It's do you remember how much? Hundreds of thousands of close to $400,000. So there's we're trying to make some room in the budget for things that we've said we're committed to doing. So that's not really a deal breaker, but it's just another example. The closer and closer you look at this, there are just so many sort of requirements and caveats, and many of them you can monetize and they have an impact on the project.
So I just want to give the presenters a chance. Is there anything else that you want to say before we go to committee questions? Good. Okay. Members of the committee.
May I ask Mr. Oh, sorry. I was
No,
going
go
to
ahead.
ask Mr. Pruitt a clarifying question, and then, is that okay?
Yeah, please.
So you had said that the reason that municipalities weren't purchasing PPAs in the past was because it wasn't really an option. Really, our only option was a PPA. It only became a viable option sort of with these new tax credits. So while we do have a history with PPAs with VO in Winchester High School, that's likely because there wasn't another option before.
Well,
Is that correct?
there was an option. It was just a bad option.
It was a really bad option.
Right.
So the reason we're looking at this now and even thinking about purchasing is because purchasing has become, and in some municipalities, I believe Hastings Elementary in Lexington purchased their solar panels, and there are more and more municipalities taking advantage of the purchase now that wouldn't have even considered it before. Is that accurate?
That's true, yes. Yep.
Okay.
Mr. Brady?
Thank you. I just love to, and I may have missed it, but I'd love to see some more detail on the financial implications of the different options and kind of modeled over time. It would be nice to see what that would look like, especially with some different variables. I think we see lots of changes in rates and lots of changes in costs, and as more things go electric, it would be interesting to see what those look like. So I'm not sure who would do that, but it would be helpful to have that, especially from someone with experience in this and a financial background modeling these things over the long term, because I think this school, I'm hoping, is going to be at least a 50-year school. So it would be good to see what this is going to look like long term, and just some various scenarios would be really helpful as we consider it. And I appreciate all the work that you're doing, and we're trying to move as fast as we can and meet all the timelines. So I don't want to hold anyone up, but it would be great to have some more detail on the numbers.
I'd like to echo that as well, and I'd like to understand a little bit about the revenue generation that comes from a PPA versus ownership as well.
Mr. Nardone has been working with Zapotec, who is Tepe's solar consultant, to provide information about their financial modeling. Now, what they will provide is they will provide an estimate of the payback to the town under two different models based on the information that they have available to them. And just
so you all know, the way a PPA works, you pay $0 up front. The provider engineers and installs and maintains the system for you. In return, they usually offer about 15% off your electrical bill for the building. So what the town gets is a 15% discount on electricity over the life of the lease. So when you get the net benefit to the town is going to be 20 years times that 15% discount. And it's a fairly significant amount of money. It is definitely value. On the flip side, if the town owns the system, it pays $0 in electrical bills over the life of the project, but has to pay for and maintain that system, and the upfront cost is fairly significant. That being said, and I think Zapotec's numbers will probably play this out, is there's a reason that companies provide PPAs, because it's good for the owner, but it's also good for them.
Mm-hmm.
They make money on it. If they didn't make money on it, then they wouldn't do it. And so what you'll find is that the long-term net benefit to the town is greater for direct ownership. It's still positive, but less great for a PPA. And so you're kind of trading first cost and risk for no cost and less risk and less money over the life of the 20 years of the PPA. So
I guess my only question about that would be, TAPE is our architect. It's their consultant they're paying. What's their interest?
So the reason we went to TAPE with a private consultant was to have no interest, rather than letting a firm come in representing the PPA and try to sell us to that direct. So we made the decision as the committee to have TAPE bringing their consultant in that's biased to either system to tell us what's the best for the school. So.
In other words, can I just add, so that there's sort of two general contract types. You have an owner-contractor agreement or relationship, and you have an owner-agent relationship. In an owner-agent relationship, which is what you have when you contract with an architect or engineer, you're paying for their time and expertise. So, so for any sub-consultant working under TAPE, we're getting unvarnished and unbiased advice.
Because they have no interest either way.
That's right.
Yep.
Whereas in an owner-contractor relationship, you're buying widgets, you're buying something, and so what the contractor's interested in doing whatever they can to minimize their costs, maximize their gain. They can have a financial interest in sort of tweaking what you get. That's not the case. So at the end of the day, all we're paying TAPE architects for is their time. Doesn't matter if it's a 2-story or a 4-story building, it's pink or purple, we're just paying them for their time.
That's helpful, thank you.
The report they did today, I mean, I know it was late. We wanted it Friday so everyone would have the weekend to mull it over. It did come out later on this afternoon, so it will be shared eventually, probably later today or something. There's a lot of detail in there. It's cut down to 7 pages from the original 30 or 40 pages.
Thank you.
Or 58 pages. So,
thank you.
And that was the whole trouble, to really get it so you can understand what they're trying to say. And I think if the best thing to do would be read that over, and we take questions back against that report, questions you had to the report.
Thank you.
Versus what we are saying now.
What's you had mentioned that the upfront cost is fairly significant. What is fairly significant? And then you had also mentioned that the maintenance cost falls on the owner, if in a direct owner. What's the maintenance cost like?
That's an argument between if you really do maintenance.
Right.
So cleaning solar panels, there is warranties, so the warranties would pay for most of it. But with any warranty, it's mostly material, not labor.
Mm-hmm.
So if there was an inverter or a panel that goes bad, we would be on the hook for the labor after a certain amount of years. The material is mostly warranted for 15 years on a solar. Now, that being said, with PPA, there is, if you were to do work to your roof, you're on the hook for removing the panels because it's your problem. So they cover on the PPA, they cover the maintenance or anything that has to be done, they cover the repairs. But anything that's caused by the owner would be extra at that time too. So it's not a $0. Things could happen. But the upfront, it's a better chance with the PPA that you're not gonna spend anything else.
And with that, could you just briefly on the roof, like, is this a 20-year roof? Is this a 30-year roof? Is this a 50-year roof if they work that way? I know they work that way for houses, but I have no idea.
Yeah,
for
no,
a
it's
school.
designed as a 20-year roof.
Okay.
But
Well, it's a
should go-
20-year warranty anyway.
20-year warranty, which, so that's,
20 roof.
yeah.
Oh,
You
yeah.
should be really there.
20 years and 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Only-
Just like my car.
I'm only saying that, Dr. Hackett, because in a moment, we will talk about the Ambrose roof, and it's 18 years old, and we will not be replacing that roof within the next 2 years. So we have a history in Winchester of having roofs that go beyond their warranty.
Not by design. Could I ask a question?
Yeah, please.
Just a clarifying question, and Mark, you touched on this. I'm still not understanding the design piece of this. So, Chris had a slide that says it's not this or that, but at some level, it feels like it is this or that. It seems to me that direct ownership would have a different level of design and planning than it would with a PPA. So you say something along the line of, if a PPA, we don't want to have a company come in and, rip up asphalt to install a PPA system. So presumably, a PPA contractor is not going to have access to the site when it's under the development of the project. I don't imagine the site contractor is going to have welcomed somebody else in because they'd be on the hook for anything that went wrong. So can you talk a little bit about that in terms of just the timing and what it means to the committee in and around, and I understand that they're being asked to say that we would be okay with it as opposed to approve it, but I'm just curious about the difference between the two and the impact.
So our understanding was that if a PPA agreement could be made in a relatively timely fashion, that the company that provided it would be able to get started on the engineering of the system sooner and be able to coordinate better, at least communicate with the design team during the early construction phase to make sure that there were no elements that were not being installed that should be installed, or there were ways that they could coordinate around specific aspects of the site development in particular. It depends a little bit, I guess, and maybe this is where I'm not knowledgeable enough about the approval process within the town of Winchester in the case of a PPA versus direct ownership, whether the timeline for the ultimate approval would actually be the same point or direct approval would be out farther. And when we had the discussion in the EFPBC, our expectation was that for PPA, the agreement from the town would come earlier than it would if it were direct ownership. And that's where we were getting that time opportunity cost of being able to know things sooner for the design team and for the construction team when they're on site. So that's our understanding. If that's incorrect, it would be good to know that.
I wouldn't know that you were.
Although, can I follow up with that, Dr. Hackett? Wouldn't they be engineering for it regardless? Because isn't this a solar project? They know where the solar panels are going. They know where the conduit needs to be laid. Aren't our engineers and architects I would be friendly if they weren't already designing for that as part of the project.
I would defer the question to the
Right.
experts.
So they're taking account for how much solar we need,
Right.
but the PPA pays for their own designing. They design their own system. So our engineers are not designing the solar system because it's not being bid as part of the project.
So how with the PPA would we know we would get the solar that we wanted if we didn't own it?
That's good.
Okay, can I?
In the PPA?
In the final design, the PPA is designing the project and not us. How do we know we're getting exactly what we want, where we want, decide to expand solar on the site at a later date, if they own those panels, then our system might not interact with their system.
So I can answer the interact. Every time you do a system, even if it's 6 months later,
Yeah.
it's a different smart submission to the state. So even if they could look the same, they're different systems. They all have to be metered separately, and the time will run out separately. So what is the smart, 15 years for canopies, I believe. So if you started 15 years for canopy A on July, and you bring another one in September, it'll be 15 years for that one. That will run its own course. It won't be part of the same project.
Whether we own it or people.
Whether you're in it or not,
Can you put owned panels and PPA panels on the same site?
you can. That's what they're proposing here, because we have to, for the MSBA and the lead, we have to own the third floor classroom.
So if we already own the third floor classroom, then how does that work with the PPA owned panels?
It's a
Are those
separate
on
submission.
different systems?
Separate
Two sy- yeah.
systems.
Wouldn't it be easier to have everything on one?
It would be easier, but it's a matter of them designing it and it becoming part of the project with the dollars. That we need the money to do it and make it part of the project.
I know that this is a hard conversation because it's scary because it's new. And anytime we try something new, there's a hesitation. But I just want to make sure that we're also not doing it because we've always done it that way. If
Right.
there's a better way to build the mousetrap.
Tom, I think, Meg, did you have a comment you wanted to make on the PPA process?
I was
If
just gonna
that's
say
okay.
that the way you ensure that you get what we want is we outline that in the RFP. So there's still a procurement process that happens. So we would specify what system we need, all the components, all the, requirements to meet the electrical needs, and that would be specified in the RFP.
But we're still going to have two kinds of ownership on the same site.
If
With the
we
PPA.
went with the PPA and then the limited
Right.
ownership.
Yes.
So I also heard, I'm sorry, I forget who said it, 15% for a PPA
Yep.
currently? Is that what we have on the current PPAs also?
I don't remember specifically, but we could look it up easily. We have them.
Because I'm curious if we're making any, I heard that we make a smaller amount of money with the PPA, and I'm curious what the benefit to the town financially has been from the PPAs we already have. Like, is it even a significant financial benefit?
It does vary. There's no set amount because they have to look at the cost of the installation. So if an installation is more expensive, of course, they're going to change that in the rate that they're paying back. Because they're investors. They have to get their money.
So is this an expensive installation?
The roof is a simple installation. The canopies, depending on how they're done, could be rather expensive. Especially where we don't want the boilerplate canopy you might see in some locations. We're going to request that it's a little bit nicer than some of these, so.
But in doing that, we might get less back.
It might be. That's part of negotiations. They have to be part of the presentation to see what they're offering for a canopy structure.
Would it
and
look
how
like the
looks.
Stone Zoo one, the Children's Museum one?
They're all different, right? And you go into Lexington and see them, they're all different.
Lincoln Sudbury High School has.
Yep.
Yeah.
Lexington is gross.
That's it.
The ones I've seen.
But to whoever
And-
thinks
and
a
to be
parking
fair,
lot is
he's only
better
been to
looking than a
superintendent's
canopy.
office, so.
I've seen the Stone Zoo stacked up, so I haven't seen it installed yet, if it's up yet.
Oh, I haven't
Months ago, I
seen it.
saw
Yeah.
them
Yeah.
laying
Come to think
down,
of it.
so.
The Discovery Museum in Acton has a nice one.
Okay, yeah.
Nice in terms of design versus just a straight.
Right,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
It clarifies.
And do we have more control over that design if we own versus a PPA?
I understand we can, right? We had some conversation in August, we can roll in the design of the canopies into the PPA. I mean, within
Well,
reason.
right, but who
It
ultimately
shouldn't be,
decides, the PPA or
they can't be
us?
gold leaf or anything, but.
Right.
I think when we review the PPA submissions, because it's not really it's a bidding process, but when they come back, they would have to probably present what they're offering for a system.
So can I clarify one thing? That we certainly can go out to bid for just the universe of solar companies that are out there for either ownership or PPA. but we don't have to. As members of, the town is a member of the Nonprofit Purchasing and Energy Consortium Power Options, which is a nonprofit, and there's an exemption from state procurement laws for energy services if you're a member of that type of organization. So they actually have a solar developer as part of their panoply of companies that provide different services. They have another company that provides EV charging stations, et cetera. And so we can choose to go directly to sole source to a company named Select, which is actually the company that did the 2 previous PPAs that were mentioned earlier. You don't have, competition from that standpoint if you're sole sourcing. So there is, that's one of the reasons that Zapotec was hired to provide completely separate, independent, design advice. But I will say that Power Options, as a membership nonprofit, was very careful in hiring Select. They went through their own procurement process, hired Select, and they actually ride herd on every contract that Select signs with a participating municipality, understanding what ballpark rates should be for different types of installations, to ensure that their members get basically a good deal. So I'm not saying we need to go that way, but it's certainly an option for us, and I think it's a fairly safe one for the reasons that I said, but we could also choose to put it out to bid to the universe of solar companies.
May I clarify, Tom, that closing comment, and I'm glad Dr. Hackett made this point, to clarify this issue of it's not between this or that. I just want to reiterate that we don't want anybody to feel like we're asking the school committee to choose between PPA and direct ownership, because that would effectively be saying, okay, we support PPA, but we don't support direct ownership. I'm not there. I do see the long-term financial benefits of direct ownership. I think the issue we struggled with the EFPBC was, that we don't have the project budget for direct ownership. The school committee isn't sitting on the millions of dollars required for direct ownership, so that would have to come from somewhere. And in any sort of, let's say, pre-COVID scenario, and we've discussed this at the EFPBC, that kind of funding would have to flow through town meeting. Now, it is a little different because of COVID, because, everybody talks about ARPA, and, for that Lynch neighborhood, discussion, Mike, we had town meeting members stand up and say, why can't we use ARPA money? Well, one of the things I heard Rich Mucci say was, well, we don't have enough ARPA money left to do all of that. And orders of magnitude, the cost of going all in for direct ownership here would be similar. It's around, that means millions?
3 million.
Yeah, it's similar order of magnitude to the work that Tool Design is proposing for the neighborhood. So what that says to me is, well, even if the board were to say, we see value in direct ownership, maybe we can use some ARPA money, that could be great, but I don't know that there's enough to make it happen. It's also not my judgment. Mike knows better than any of us around the table what's available. But if the school committee can say, yes, we would support a power purchase agreement, it still doesn't necessarily mean we have to go that route. It's a conversation for the select board to have with Beth Rudolph and say, okay, we understand there's 2 ways to get there. One of these ways has a green light. Do we want to talk about the other way? What's that cost benefit, the return on investment? And the information Jay's pulling together might be helpful for that conversation. I'm just not sure it's the school committee's position to say, well, we should direct own it, because there are just so many implications to that. The most obvious is, where would the money come from? And that, to Mark's point, when we assumed that the PPA path could come about more quickly, it's just based on the fact that we could execute an agreement, presumably have a pilot from the select board in time for fall town meeting, because we've done it on that timeline in the past. But if we were going to direct own, I presume you'd need a longer runway to figure out where to find $3 million. Roger's here. We don't have that sitting in the stabilization fund. So it's an important conversation to have. If we say, yes, we support a PPA, it doesn't mean we're against direct ownership. That was the point of that closing slide. And my final remark, which is a segue to what comes next in the agenda. If everyone in this room feels strongly about direct owning a solar system on a school roof, this is not our only opportunity, because we're going to talk about the Ambrose roof in a few minutes, And Ambrose, you know, it needs a new roof. We have talked abstractly with the committee about doing some investigation that would support solar. We've talked about it with capital. If we want to put solar on the roof at Ambrose, how are we going to do it? Are we going to do a PPA, or do we want to direct own that? If we feel strongly we want to direct own that, it could easily double the cost of the project. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but an Ambrose roof could be $1.5 to $2 million. So if you want to put solar on that roof and you want to own it, I would assume you tack on at least $1 million to do that. And that then factors into a much bigger conversation that, you know, the board would have around things like capital override, right, for projects. And then there's the new Morocco, and I think that's even been discussed at the select board table as well. What will the new Morocco be in terms of green design goals and meeting the climate action plan? It remains to be seen what the new Morocco looks like. It might be a green roof, might have solar on it. It might be, we've talked about geothermal, depending upon where the new Morocco goes. I mean, there's all sorts of options. So this is not our last opportunity to own solar, if that's what we want to do. So I just wanted to leave that sort of big picture comment.
So I had a few questions as well, just to I think round this out. I think most of the committee members have asked those. So some of the things I've heard, timeline is we need to have this resolved, you know, certainly by midsummer. It sounds like the latest. I was curious on Mr. Scott, when you mentioned the process for the PPA where they do the design engineering, then the installation, and then the maintenance, whether that design phase could be pulled out. Could we have TAPE do the design and put that out to bid for people? Because I do recall a prior meeting, maybe when Charlie was here, some conversation about we don't want these things coming in from outer space and being dropped onto our property. We want to, and I heard you talk about we want to have influence on the design. And the reason I ask before you answer is it buys us more time in the timeline as well.
Exactly. Last week we brought that up at the meeting. I asked if he could take it on as a design, if that was the case, so we would know the system. It's not a
for either option.
It's the same, right? It doesn't guarantee that the PPA vendor would buy into it, thinking that it's financially attractive to them to do it, but it would be the system that we wanted from the designer.
They could then bid to that spec.
Yeah. And there's other advantages to that too. It might be that, without getting too deep into it, that maybe the project puts in not just the conduits, but it does the bases to the canopies, so the grade can be done while we're waiting for the canopies to come in. There's a lot of different ways to go back and forth on it, but.
Yeah, so that just, I didn't know if it was completely siloed but it sounds like that could possibly be shared. That's an interesting thing to learn more about. You know, with regard to, we don't have $3 million floating around. Maybe the select board can find $3 million. Yeah, I know we've worked in the past on that Wellfield property, so there's some precedent for being able to do stuff. So that just thought occurred to me.
Working collaboratively with the select board.
Sorry.
Working collaboratively with the select board.
I was just going to say, I don't think any money came with that deal, but maybe it
Sorry.
was asleep at this.
Am I being too cryptic?
I think I read between the lines. Is that correct, Mr. Huffman?
That was my point, was
Yeah.
that we didn't control the whole site, but we were able to build on the whole site because we were able to have a collaboration with the select board. And so perhaps if we understood the totality of the options here and we thought, hey, there's this option that we don't have control over the levers, we don't have the money to do it, but select board might, that we might be able to have a conversation and figure out if they could pull the lever while we push the stick and the thing happens. I don't know. I was curious on the power options and the select, whether they do both power purchase and direct purchase, and I feel like I thought that they did, and if they did, would it make sense to have them, you know, I get if you have multiple vendors selling different things that it's hard to compare them, but if you have the same vendor selling both things, is that a useful data point, or do we feel comfortable with the TAPE subcontractor?
I'll let Ken answer also, but anytime you're bidding, the same contractor's doing both, they're gonna favor whichever one's.
They have a preference.
And more financially to them, but Ken, you might have something else on that also.
Yeah, I mean, they will do either a PPA or purchase. And that was the case before, it's just that they never did direct purchase with municipalities because it made no sense to the municipalities, but now they'll, now it does, so they'll show you either one or both. I will say, if it were up to me, I mean, they've contacted me, they know we're working on an elementary school, they're eager to try to put something in front of us, ultimately hoping to get the business. There'd be no, I've told them this, first of all, I didn't have authority to give them any design documents or drawings or numbers, but they would be, they're eager to see and to try to present something to us, which, we could, with no obligation, I've said, even if we did allow them to do that, there'd be no guarantee that we wouldn't just put it out to bid. So, I think it couldn't hurt to have them show us what they have, and there'd be no obligation on our part.
I was just thinking that we have sort of an information void here where we're trying to weigh two things and we don't know how much either of them weighs. And so it might be helpful to have the TAPE, who may have their own internal biases or not, I don't know, and have this other company may have some biases, and then at least we have 4 data points. Maybe one of them even just presents the data better than the other, but it gives us, it's just hard to compare. I'm struggling with trying to compare these.
I think after you read today's report, it might help a little bit.
Okay.
You have a chance,
Yeah, I
a
haven't
couple
seen it.
days to digest that.
Okay, and then my last comment was just going back to Mr. Brady's comment that I think, just really trying to understand the merits of both of these. Understanding that one of the options we may not have the levers for, but even just putting on the record the considerations that we made when we said yes. Ultimately, there's 3 options here. Don't do solar, which no one thinks is the right option. Do PPA or do direct ownership. And so we're certainly on one of those latter 2, and we don't have the money to pay for direct ownership, so that would have to be a collaboration. But it would be great to, as Mr. Brady had asked, get, and maybe the report has it once we see that. So yeah.
I think to your point about information asymmetry, the other piece of this is kind of the town side financing, and it's something that regardless of your appetite for PPA versus direct ownership, the information will be available from Zapotec, from the design team for this project, relatively accurate comparison of a PPA to direct ownership with an anticipated first cost that the town, whether it's finance or select board or capital, whoever is in charge of that, to actually go run the numbers, figure it out, understand how would we finance this if we wanted to do it? What would be the pathways that we could take? And then how does that impact the bottom line, long-term payback for this project, especially if debt financing is involved, it's going to change the metrics. But that's stuff that's like completely out of our hands, right? That's stuff that's entirely within the town's hands and its funding mechanisms. But this is a great opportunity to look into that, so that for the future, for now or for the future, we all know better how we get there.
Exactly, yeah. And so maybe we're just a little bit early because we haven't seen the reports and whatnot, but getting all that information out and doing, wherever we land on this, and obviously 100% net zero is what we want. So, but I think it'll be great to see that additional information. Did people have any committee members have any other comments?
I just want to say I think it's exciting to talk about a capital revenue generating capital project instead of capital projects that depreciate. So I really like the idea of investing either way in a capital project that's potentially going to generate revenue for the town over time. It gets us to renewable energy.
Oh, and you had mentioned the report, the summarized report. Is that already available, or
it is? I sent it late this afternoon, so to Michelle. So you're going to send it out whenever you.
Just be disseminated.
Not in time for the meeting.
Got it.
Yeah. We tried to get it for Friday for the weekend. I know. I know. It was my concern all day and all yesterday.
Yeah, exactly. We started having the conversation, so I appreciate you pulling together what you have now. Mr. Hopcroft, do you want questions on this to come through you, to Jay? Or if we have further questions, would you like us to reach out to Mr. Nardone on our own?
I'm okay either way, just if you copy me, if you want to reach out directly, or you can do it through me. I'm fine forwarding questions, but I don't know. In my world, it's often easier just to send things directly and just
Okay.
keep me in the loop.
Whatever
but-
works the easiest, we
yeah.
get them
Yeah.
answered.
All right.
And Mr. Nardone, questions should come through you,
Yes, and,
or
yeah,
Mr. Scott, or, okay.
yep. I'll forward
Thank you.
around.
Great. Any other questions? Well then, thank you very much for
Okay.
your time. I don't know if you're part of the future capital things,
Well,
or?
I think if we segue to the capital stuff with Ambrose, I know Roger's interested in hearing it. I wanted Ken to stick around too, because he was helpful with some information for me. Mark is an Ambrose parent, so he can stick around if he wants to listen to it, otherwise go home.
And can I note, we're already an hour behind, so if we could, it would be great to
Yeah, and
keep this update to a concise one, so we can have some time to discuss the Lynch hours and everything, and preschool hours.
thank you, Mr. Brady. And I will say, I was talking with the superintendent. I don't know if I can call you Dr. Hackett or superintendent, about putting off our executive session till the next meeting because we're running behind a bit. And
Yeah, there's nothing pressing.
all right, so on to the capital projects update, and this, as you recall, we are getting updates from our esteemed member, Mr. Nixon, on capital projects, such that when it comes time this summer to prioritize these projects, we're not hit with a fire hose and having to try to take in too much background too quickly. So I think we're doing the Ambrose and McCall roof and Winchester High School flooring, maybe?
So there was a memo I sent out, didn't go out to everybody by email, but I think, Dr. Hackett, do you have that you can sort of pull up? That'll be maybe my talking points. There's really three things to check in with you all on
Packet?
tonight. What's
It
that?
came in late today.
I think it came in late also.
Yeah, it's just a memo you can refer back to if you want to after the meeting.
Sorry,
Okay,
I get to do it in front of everybody.
you're always getting better at the technology,
Thank
right?
you, Mr. Brady. I appreciate that.
Exponentially over time.
I'm dying for someone to give me some positive feedback.
Exponentially over time.
When you start at the bottom.
But I'm
Surprised
still
Charlie
haven't
didn't comment it on his way out, but he's got one
Not
more
in the
time.
packet, but it is in an email. Can I, how do I, let me,
do-
Andrew, how do I
Andrew's
get
here.
this off here? Not project, so I can find it without everyone seeing my email mess.
Well, why don't I do this? Why don't I,
K,
What?
that window key and K.
Okay, all right,
Look at that.
all right.
I think, Mr. Marin, we all need some, like, school committee tech
You know,
lessons,
so-
too. Can we have a professional development class?
Dr. Hackett allowed me to test this new system tonight live.
Yes, live.
Jackson, do you need,
Quite
do you
nervous
ju- do you
about
just
it.
need a copy of it in front of you? Chris?
I was just pulling it up.
That-
right now.
I have a hard copy if you want.
Yeah. I've got it. I've got it in front of me. You have it?
Yes.
We're gonna get it.
This will be quick once we just get it up.
How much
And,
money I
Mike,
save
are
you
are
on
you okay sticking
secretarial
around?
administrative support time?
This will be of interest.
Yes.
I'm not sure that's a savings, Dr.
Yes.
It's a fair point.
It is a savings, I
There you
think
go.
so.
Maybe blow it up a little.
We don't pay
Okay.
Aaron to come to these meetings, that's a
Please have some
significant
water
saving.
and cake in the wall.
Well, let's, if we can, am I good to go, Mr. Chair? While you're
Yes,
having
please.
a
Go
massive
ahead.
cupcake, fruits and
Go ahead,
vegetables.
yes. I thought we might need
So
extra
let's start
sugar.
off, I want to start off with some really good news and say that I think my last time I spoke to you about the McCall project, we had a lot of folks show up for the pre-bid conference. We had 5 or 6 bidders submit, and Meg was able to award the project at over $150,000 below budget. We had budgeted, I think, $825 for that, Roger. So we've awarded the project at $657. So, you know, there are always contingencies built in because things can go wrong, but that's just great news. They have a site meeting scheduled for early June. Meg's closely involved in this, of course. This does mean, you know, the main entrance to McCall is going to be closed. The project includes a lot of repair work for the curved stairs in front of the auditorium entrance. So that's also off limits. So there's that kind of cafeteria entrance a little further up Main Street that I think is really our only other way to get in and out of the building, off of Main Street anyway. So, you know, Mr. Lynn will be there. There are things going on during the summer. You've got the Great Expectations program, so there will be some coordination work that I presume Mr. Marin will have to do with Mr. Lynn and Meg, but sort of excited about getting it underway. It has taken a long time. Roger, we started talking about this, what, 5 years ago? At least?
At least.
So appreciate town meeting support. So anyway, so that's good news. Then I just want to pivot quickly. Ms. Bergstrom had asked me to give you guys an update on the roof project. So what you see there on screen is a quick reminder where we were last cycle, our top four priorities. So it was McCall Middle School, so that's great. That's been bid. It's under budget. It's going to happen. You got the Lincoln Elementary work. We reviewed that again at a recent meeting about what that scope looked like, so we don't have to talk about that tonight. And then bringing up the rear was the McCall Middle School and Ambrose Elementary. We had originally advocated for $250,000 to do kind of a schematic level, but fairly detailed investigation of these roofs. So what's needed for repair or replacement. Something detailed enough that we could understand what the cost would actually be. Capital, you know, as a matter of practice, needs that. Capital planning tends to, in fact, I think almost always, capital just won't, capital's not going to fund, capital's not going to commit to something if it doesn't have a real decent idea of what it's going to cost. So, you know, we take some baby steps through this process. So this is where we were. We advocated for this. Dr. Hackett was there as well. And at the same time, management came in with some interest in reviewing the roofs at the public library and at Town Hall that are both in need of some replacement or repair. So ultimately, it was decided to, and Dr. Hackett, you can scroll down a little bit, what came forward to fall town meeting, and this is an excerpt from the capital report. What ultimately came forward under Article 8, Motion 1, was to actually ask for $150,000, so less money, stretched over 4 buildings. So we're still going to get information, but it's not as deep of a dive. This is it's more like visual inspection. I mean, Meg could, you know, probably offer more detail, but it's not a detailed set of drawings, let's put it that way. So that work was bid in over the winter. The work is going on now. Meg expects maybe by mid-June, we have some report in from Gale Engineering that will give us a general sense of the condition of the roofs, urgency for repair or replacement, and one hopes some maybe ballpark range of what cost would be. So I make this important distinction here, if Dr. Hackett, you scroll down a little bit, that at the middle school, it's pretty straightforward. McCall, as you know, is a collection of buildings from different years, different roofs, different roof types. Some are pitched, some are flat, different materials. It's sort of a mess of stuff. And so that will be an interesting report to see. For me, and I think others on Capitol, we're sort of expecting this is going to be the more expensive of the two projects. It's going to be more involved. It's going to be just much less straightforward. Then there's the Ambrose School. So the Ambrose roof is basically nearly 18 years old. Much simpler roof by comparison to McCall. It's a newer roof, but it's very straightforward, consistent building materials and design details and so forth. So on the one hand, that should be a simpler project to sort of understand what it takes to replace. But you see what I throw up there in bold, which is, so what about solar? I want to remind this committee that in the spring of 18, the energy management coordinator came forward to the school committee to propose that we enter into a power purchase agreement with, it was actually Select, that you just heard Ken mention, for both VO and Ambrose. The Ambrose idea sort of died a quick death because PPAs are amortized over 20 years. And at that point, the Ambrose roof was 12 years old. So we said, well, you know, we don't want to be on the hook to have to pull the system off to replace the roof. Susan McPhee went back to management. They talked about it. There was no way to like shorten the term of the PPA and have it make financial sense. That's the only reason we did not proceed with solar at Ambrose. So now it's 2023, and the roof's 18 years old. We know we need to replace it. Pete Lawson would tell you we need to replace it, and we have to figure out how to pay for it. Part of that discussion around question 2 that the select board had in seeking the $400,000 of the operating override was not only to pay for the neighborhood traffic safety improvements, but to have a little bit extra sort of gas in the tank that could help sort of sustain maybe the bonding for other projects. Is that fair to say, Mike? I mean, you talked about school roof projects, you know, maybe Ambrose, maybe McCall. But what's important to understand is there weren't necessarily details, you know, that drove that number. I mean, the select board, some were down at 320, some were up at 500, 400, they sort of met in the middle. The money would be welcome. But whatever Ambrose roof is gonna cost, and absent the report in June, it's at least $1 million, maybe it's $2, but it's millions of dollars. If we're gonna put solar on the roof, then we need some more information. We need to figure out what kind of dead load that roof can support. The good news is that structural engineer is engaged with us today. It's the same engineer who's working on the Lynch project, same engineer that worked on VO. When we did finally enter into the PPA on VO, we went back to that structural engineer who pulled all those calculations out and were able to give us really helpful guidance on the scope of the system that the PPA at VO could support. So we have an opportunity, necessity really, if we're going to proceed with solar at Ambrose. We have to do that work. We need to get structural engineer engaged again. Tell us what it can support. But then the next big question is the conversation we just had for 45 minutes, which is, if we're interested in solar at Ambrose, do we want to go with a PPA or do we want to own it? And if we want to own it, that project just became a lot more expensive. And I'm glad Roger McPeak is here tonight because we have talked about the need for roof projects in the context of the stabilization funds, and we've kicked around rough numbers. The committee will remember, was it January or February, Roger? I think the select board or Chairman Mucci had asked, what would capital do if you had $2 million in free cash? You know, what projects would you prioritize? We had a lot of conversation around what roofs we might prioritize. If we were going to roll solar into the project scope, then the price goes way up, and some of those frankly become, I would say, unattainable through like the usual process. So that's what I wanted to throw out to the committee. My recommendation, which I think is on the top of the last page, Dr. Hackett, if you scroll to it, we're not taking any votes tonight, but I think the intent that Michelle had in having these periodic updates was so that when we talk in the summer about capital priorities, we can kind of hit the ground running. My recommendation to this committee, if they would welcome it, is that we could consider a capital request for around $40,000. That's based on some feedback from TAPE. We could actually get that structural analysis from the engineer that did the work at Ambrose, and we could also, with that money, engage a firm like a Zapotec that did that conceptual work that Jay and Mark have already described, and they're doing more detailed work now. Zapotec can actually sort of create a conceptual plan of what kind of solar you could get on the roof at Ambrose. With that, we could understand what the generation could be. We could understand what we could save on our bills with a PPA. We could understand the long-term benefits if we wanted to direct purchase. And then we could decide whether we were going to do it or not. Because if we're going to do it, it's a different approach to the roof. I mean, these systems, they can be ballasted, they can be mechanically fastened. You don't just sort of throw a solar system on a roof. There may be roof vents or other roof penetrations that need to get moved so that you kind of create a more open field for solar for greater density. So these are all issues that are there. In a conversation that I had with Ken, which is why I'm glad he's here tonight, is, you know, so much is happening and changing in terms of legislation at the state and federal level. You heard about the Inflation Reduction Act, but included in the FY24 budget, Ken was just sharing with me today, the Green School Works program, which is a $100 million grant program, looks exciting and may be eligible to cover all or part of the replacement costs of a roof if it's tied with a solar project. So, Ken, I don't know if Ken had any thoughts in particular on Ambrose, but I was glad he was going to be here tonight because there was real interest in solar in 2018. It didn't make sense because of the age of the roof. We've spent a lot of time talking about a roof at Ambrose, and the select board's been talking about it too. So this is a good moment for us to kind of do a gut check and say, what about this for solar?
Yeah, that's a great update, and I will say it just underscores the importance of understanding these issues. You know, going to zero utility costs on buildings. You know, I mean, it's a select board probably issue about what the town wants to do, but it's a really interesting moment in time moment that we have every time we build a new roof, whether we're replacing or putting a new one on. So I appreciate the update. I don't know if you were asking if Ken had any comments on that, or Mr. Pruitt.
I'm done. He gave me some helpful insight. If you've got questions for Ken, or if he has something to add, I'm happy to hear it.
I just saw him sitting in the middle of the room there nodding a little bit. I felt, do you have anything, Mr.
Just
Pruitt?
two brief things. One is that, where the town is now in terms of climate goals, I think anytime we're looking at replacing a roof, we just should automatically evaluate it for solar. Whether it's a PPA versus direct purchase is kind of irrelevant, but if we have an opportunity to convert an existing roof to, a clean power plant that we get reimbursed for, while also meeting the town's climate goals, it just seems to make sense. And then related to that is whether with a PPA or if this Green School Works program survives the process and actually ends up in the budget, there may be opportunities going forward where we can essentially pay for all or some of new roofs that we have to have anyway when tied into a solar project. So essentially, we'll be able to replace our roofs at a lower cost or even no cost going forward, depending on how lucrative some of these grant programs are. So I think those are just two powerful reasons to carefully evaluate solar every time we look at a roof replacement.
You make me think about how dense our town is, and when you talked about power plants, I was like, we don't have any fields or places that we could stick solar arrays, so it's except on top of these buildings. So that's interesting.
And parking lots.
And parking lots, and then of course the question of how do you pay for it, which may bump out of our lane a little bit. Great. Any other
Just
on that
clarify,
point?
there's no expectation Ambrose would be net zero. Just want to say that. It'd still be a really good thing to do. There's not enough roof available for Ambrose to be net zero, and it's a very tight site, but it would be a smart direction for us to take the project if we could include solar, and if that's with a PPA, I presume the select board would be supportive of a pilot agreement, but if Mike and his colleagues, the reason I think it's good we're talking about this tonight is if the idea of direct ownership for Lynch is either a bridge too far or it's a bridge too far too soon, given the timing, this is another outstanding opportunity to take advantage of valuable real estate on a school building. And to Michelle's point, it's something new. We haven't done it before. There's considerably more runway here, if you will, to sort of figure out if we wanted to do direct ownership. Make that decision, make the case, figure out where the funding comes from. I presume somebody's presenting to town meeting. I mean, we got plenty of time to just do it right.
Yeah, this is great. I mean, lots of options. Sounds like we're moving kind of in generally the right direction. I'm thinking again about Mr. Brady's point about modeling out. A lot of it's going to come down to modeling it out, and probably the select board, making some decisions about what makes sense on the town side for this.
So does it make sense? Is the school committee willing? I mean, I could bring back a little more detail on this. Is this idea of perhaps a capital request for structural evaluation and solar modeling for Ambrose? Is that something the committee is interested in talking about?
I think the idea, Mr. Nixon, was we were going to hear the things that would go for as we move towards prioritizing.
In other words, that we would bring that
requests.
forward as part of our summer conversation.
Right.
Yeah, that's what
Right.
I'm asking.
Yeah. So the question is, should that be part of that conversation?
Yeah.
And I think yes.
I think it'd be helpful if it could be.
Yeah.
Okay.
Great.
Thank you.
All right. So now, Dr. Hackett, if we can move to consideration of 2324 Lynch at Parkhurst Elementary. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, everyone, for being here.
There's no solar arrays in this conversation, just to clarify.
What about on the modulars?
So, before you kill him.
Good night.
Mr. Hopcroft.
Thank you, everyone, for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So there's nothing new to report to you. We have been coming to you for the last several meetings talking about the start time for Lynch Elementary. We have now been able to get that to 7:40 from 7:30. And so the hours would be 7:40 to 1:50. We are still working with the WEA on having to have a side letter of agreement, because as you know, the contract specifies that we can't start school before 7:50. And those conversations are going very well. I'm not anticipating any problems with any of that, but I think it would be helpful tonight if, given the fact that you've heard this multiple times, if you could consider, and you can take, I would ask that you take these separately, even though they're together on this agenda item, that you could take action to support or to approve pending contract negotiations with the WEA, a start time for Lynch at Parkhurst of 7:40 in the morning with an end time of 1:50 for the 23-24 school year. Understanding that just as a reminder, we are going back out to bid on the general ed bus contract for the 24-25 school year. One of the things that we'll be looking for is putting it out as part of it as to whether or not we can get a bid that would bring the Lynch school back into the elementary tier. So that would be helpful if you could take that action tonight. And then just to say that the kind of the one update is that in working with Sarah Casey, director of preschool, it is clear that we need to change the preschool start and end time to get the site clear. So we get the Lynch kids in, get everybody out, bring the preschool kids in, then get the Lynch kids out, and then get the preschool kids out. So, so we're not having mixed traffic around the site. So she is recommending, and I think we're prepared to have you take action on it if you're comfortable tonight with to go with a preschool at Parkhurst start time of 8:10 with an end time of 2:30. VO would stay as it is, which is the current preschool time.
What's the current
I was gonna say,
preschool
what's the
time
current?
for Parkhurst?
Parkhurst current preschool time is 9, Andrew?
To 2.
Thank you.
9 to 2.
9 to 2.
Andrea.
And what's current VO?
9 to 2.
Okay, the
9 to
same.
2.
Yeah.
Well, I'm happy to make a motion to approve those times. I appreciate all the work that's been done on the Lynch time. I've heard feedback from folks who love the early time when it was earlier. I've heard feedback from folks who didn't love the earlier time. So I think this is a good compromise. I appreciate the preschool time. I think that will be more effective for families, frankly, than starting at 9. So I think that's a win-win. So I'm happy to make that motion.
Do you want that
Second.
as 2 separate motions?
No, that's fine.
Okay.
Second.
So we have a second. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Aye. Chair votes aye. It's unanimous. Great. All right. Madam Vice Chair, do we have anyone signed up for public comment?
We do not.
Do not.
All right.
On.
Then we will close public comment quickly. All right. Anticipated agenda items for the next meeting. We have a strategic planning and facilities workshop this summer. And are there other items that the committee members want to put forth?
We can do another design update on Lynch eventually, maybe before school's out.
Tom, I'd love to get kind of an end-of-year update on student growth, how students did over the year. We've got a lot of different assessments that we do, so, I know I track my own son's assessments, but I'd like to see as a whole how our students are doing over the year, not MCAS, just our in-house, all the assessments that we do. It would be great to have some presentation on that.
Okay. Other suggestions? We don't need to. We'll have another meeting in 2 weeks. You can, if you don't have one on the top of yours.
And just if I could, on the summer workshop, I would just ask if we can start to try and get a date for that sooner, just because I know some of us may already have plans.
Oh, yeah.
I will
Maybe
help Chair
figuring out-
Hopcroft out and recommend that, about this time last year, I asked everyone to, if you know summer plans, to please get them to me.
Yep.
So, on behalf of Mr. Hopcroft, I'll suggest that again, if everyone knows you're traveling.
I will second that.
Being a painful conversation.
It was. It also helps to plan summer meetings and expectations around how many times we're going to meet this summer and need to meet this summer. And I don't know if we will need to meet. We usually meet once a month in the summer, and I don't know if we'll need to meet more often because of the Lynch project. So we'll need to have some understanding around that as well, I think.
We can do it
I
virtually.
don't think there's anything about Lynch
That
that
is also
requires us
true.
to meet more frequently. We can share some updates about
Yeah.
what's going.
So the request is if everyone could just email if you could email your vacation dates or blackout dates to Ms. Bergstrom and
I
myself.
can take those.
So as a future agenda item, then would we be looking at
setting up the summer schedule.
Summer schedule.
Yes.
Yep. Great. Future meeting dates, May 23rd, we have our public hearing on school choice, and then June 13th, agenda TBD. And
Dr. Hackett, will you be able to give us some information on what your recommendation will be on school choice in advance of the meeting, or are you still thinking it, mulling it over?
Yes. I'll give you over.
Thank you.
Yep.
Great. Well, is there, we're going to skip over the executive session and do that at the next meeting. And unless there's any other comments or business, I can
Motion to adjourn.
make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Meeting adjourned.
8:15.
Aye.
Look
at that.
It's 38. Oh.
Well, you made up the
8:30
time.
to 8:15 was.
Oh, I see what you, I was like, what do you mean 8:15? It's 8:38.
Thank you for the cupcakes.
Yeah, well-
Oh, thanks.